both Ms. Madigan and Ms. Cumming for showing up to our meeting. We are very grateful for your time and your experience and information. Both of you have extensive backgrounds in prosecution and inspection. So why don't we get a little bit of background from each of you, so we know and the rest of us understand exactly how accomplished you both are. So Ms. Cumming, if you could possibly give us a little bit of your background. I'm afraid you're muted.
Okay, now you can hear me. My name is Isabel Cumming. I am the Inspector General of Baltimore City. I have been the Inspector General for a little over 5 years. That makes me the longest in history, and no one has ever made it past 30 months. There have been 5. I'm the 5th Inspector General in Baltimore City. However, I am the first independent Inspector General. Originally, my undergraduate was in accounting. I worked for KPMG Pete Marwick. I then became the Director of Internal Audit at American National Bank. I then had the opportunity, I went to law school at night while working at the bank, which is at Lexington and Liberty, and I would walk up the street every day. And then I kept applying to work at the U.S. Attorney's Office, finally got a free internship, giving up my vice president at the bank job to work at the U.S. Attorney's Office as a free intern. And then the Jackie McLean case happened, and I applied to work to the Maryland State Prosecutor's Office, where I was selected, and my boss's name was Stephen Montanarelli. And he told me he hired me because he knew all my references. I was the first member of my family ever to go to law school, and if I hadn't done that free internship, I would have had no references. So I often remind people how important it is to do internships, especially if you're trying to do a career change. And I've always tried to really look out for interns along the way and mentor. So I worked at the state prosecutors. We did one big case there in Howard County. It was the state of Maryland versus Linda Tripp. That was a good one. And then then I worked for Baltimore City, where I was in the economic crimes unit. And I then was recruited by Glenn Ivey, who's now a United States Congressman, to become the head of economic crimes and police misconduct for Prince George's County. And I stayed there until I became the head of investigations for the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Area Transportation, which is the metro system and the bus system in D.C. And then my favorite job is now I am the Inspector General of Baltimore City. So I've been over a decade in the Inspector General work, 20 years as a prosecutor, and 10 years as an auditor. And it's a good background for this job.
Great. Thank you so much. And Ms. Madigan, your office is rather new.
Yes, it is new. Thanks so much for having me. And I just am going to give a little statement about, it's just important. I understand this is like a political organization, and it's really important to kind of talk about the work of our offices. But it's important to note that by design, Inspector General and the office of an Inspector General is intentionally not political. So I start that not to say anything other than, thanks for having me, but I think it's important to say that. So I have a very similar background to my friend, mentor, colleague, Ms. Cumming. I have been a public servant now almost 19 years. I was a assistant state's attorney in Baltimore City for 11 years, doing violent crime, supervisor, cold case homicides, complex wiretaps. I then went to the Maryland State Prosecutor's Office, where I was a deputy state prosecutor, and for a very short time, the acting state prosecutor, before getting an opportunity to go and kind of create this office. So being an inspector general is very different than being a prosecutor, but there are a lot of the same qualities and perspective that you bring to the work. You know, it's still investigations, it's still analysis of documents, it's still interviewing witnesses. It's committed to the idea that the rules apply to all, not just some, and that they need to be, you know, meted out fairly. And, you know, it's not lost on us that people file complaints for a variety of reasons, and you need to take kind of that bias into account. But at the end of the day, we're not prosecutors anymore, but we're kind of doing these administrative actions, but you take all of your background as a prosecutor to these jobs. And, you know, we have a very similar background, and I think you'll find that a lot of inspectors general have either a prosecutorial background or perhaps an auditor's background. I have never been an auditor. I am horrible at math. I have to like double check my exhibits if they're math driven all of the time. But thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much. And I just want to mention that you both went to University of Baltimore Law School, I believe, right? And we have a member who is currently there.
Correct.
Jake.
Oh, no, not Kelly.
Yeah.
No, I did.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Go
you.
UB. Yeah, Claudia's son too.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're muted, Ms. Madigan.
Oh, I was going to say, I can't say enough about UB. It's a great school.
It is.
Love it.
So thank you very much for providing some of the purpose behind being an Inspector General, Ms. Madigan. And Ms. Cumming, do you want to add to that?
I completely agree with Kelly. We are very apolitical. And too often, sometimes, that's why both of us will neither confirm or deny that our office is even doing an investigation, because we don't want anybody to use the office as a weapon. So we're very careful that nothing is released until the report is actually released to the public. So, and we're both extremely careful about the independence of the office. Both of us, it's very hard fought. And it is an office for the people. We are the people's watchdog, and we both take that very seriously. Yeah. Waste, fraud, and abuse.
Yeah, great. And could you, Ms. Cumming, tell me what kind of investigations does your office involve itself in? What jurisdiction do you have?
That's a great question. And just call me Isabel. We would investigate any elected official, any could be any employee of Baltimore City, and anybody that receives money from Baltimore City government. So it's a very large, it could be like a subcontractor, a contractor, it could be a lot of different things. I do actually have a very wide jurisdiction. So that's why our cases are very diverse, and we do actually get our cases through the hotline. So when I say we're the people's investigator, we investigate the cases we get from the people.
And Ms. Madigan, can you explain, you want me to call you Kelly, were you?
Yes.
Just,
Yes.
Can you explain what kind of investigations your office does, and perhaps what the process is that you go through?
Sure. Yeah. So we have a similar jurisdiction to Isabel's office. Our statute is written such that we have not just fraud, waste, and this word, I'm going to put it in quotes, abuse, that nobody really knows what that word means. To me, that word means misconduct, right? That means if the four corners of a piece of paper are the duties and responsibilities of your job, doing something more than those four corners, that's abuse of your position, right? Whether it's preferential treatment, whether it's reaching out and doing something that doesn't fall within those four corners. My statute also says that I am supposed to look for accountability, efficiency, and integrity within the operations of county government. Now, that's unique. Most other offices don't have that. That's kind of been hard to interpret what that really means. We did one report where we said it was an accountability report. We got a complaint that the county executive had sent an email saying everyone was going to get a COLA, a 2% cost of living adjustment, unless you were a part of a union and then you got something better than a 2% cost of living. For a variety of reasons, no fault of the administration, approximately 86 people did not get that COLA and reached out to their direct management supervision. Nothing happened. They then reached out to us. We did some investigation. We interviewed witnesses and we produced a report saying that that was an accountability report. We got a lot of pushback for that because they said it wasn't fraud, waste, or misconduct. But my jurisdiction also says accountability, efficiency, and integrity. So you talked a little bit about the business process. This is something, again, I have a much newer office and I'm the first. I started 8 weeks before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So, and it was one employee for about 10 months. So one of the things that I need to do a better job kind of going forward is to get the word out on what the office does and what the office doesn't do. So the office receives complaints, right? Those are emails, telephone calls, letters, somebody stops me in the hall, we get information. The first thing we do is we vet that information. Does that touch Baltimore County government? Is it an employee? Is it a vendor with a contract with Baltimore County government, right? Because I have jurisdiction over a contractor that has a contract that's done something inappropriate. We've written reports about majority companies that are fraudulently misrepresenting minority business percentage and goals. But it has to touch Baltimore County government, right? So some examples of things that we don't do. We don't do HR. I'm not the HR person. Potentially, if a rule was broken for someone to be hired or a policy or procedure was broken, maybe that would fall to us for misconduct. But that HR is a separate unit. We don't do things that touch other agencies or other jurisdictions. In the beginning, we got a lot of calls about COVID-19 unemployment insurance benefits. That's not for me. That's a referral to a federal agency. So the jurisdiction is broad in the sense that these are kind of these big buzzwords that can mean lots of different things, right? It can be overtime theft, it can be fraudulent documents, it can be perjury, it can be maybe hostile work environment, it can be preferential treatment for developers, but it's also narrow in that it has to touch Baltimore County government. It either has to be an employee, a vendor, Baltimore County monies. If Baltimore County gave monies for, I'm making this up as I go along, but gave monies for a fair or a participation of something and they were defrauded, that's something I could have jurisdiction over because it's Baltimore County monies. So it's broad and narrow all in the same vein.
Great, thank you. And Isabel, your office has a referral process also, does it not? And can you explain that and also explain how many you have on staff and what their various job duties are, perhaps?
Sure. Yes, we have a very strong referral process. This year so far, we've referred 85 different cases. What happens is I have a limited staff, much more than Kelly, but I have 17 people on staff. I also have the ethics department. We also have the whistleblower group. So I have different groups all within the same office. My mind just, my cat's right here.
So explain the referral process.
So the referral. So what happens is sometimes we get especially during the pandemic when people were really not in the office and everything, my team was always here. And so we always respond to situations. So that if it's not something that's in my jurisdiction, I will make what's known as a referral. So if it's something that was more HR or something DPW, or someone is having a horrible time with their bills or stuff, I will send their situation to the head of DPW, the head of HR, the head of transportation as the inspector general, and give them about 3 to 4 weeks to respond to me with what was done to fix their situation. And that has ended up being very, very positive, with a lot of people getting, through the years, we've probably had over 200 people actually getting their situation straightened out without, my office utilizing, because our reports do take a while and everything. So that has been a really good way of getting things accomplished for the citizens.
That's great. And so they have to report back to you? Do they report back in written form, or how is
Oh,
that?
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Very much so. It's a formal report, and they tell us what happened with the situation. And if we're not satisfied with the situation, we will then open up an investigation. And nobody seems to want that.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's different. We don't have the staff to do that. If we make a referral, I mean, this is kind of a double-edged sword. Sometimes it matters that I'm forwarding on, this complaint we got. Sometimes it doesn't matter. I think it's important to try to get someone to the right person. But we don't do, I mean, you'll see too, as you kind of go forward on this process, you'll find similarities amongst all these various offices, but you'll also find differences.
Yeah.
And so Kelly, if your office is going to investigate something, how do you manage that? How many investigators do you have, and how do they go about that?
Well, I had one investigator for 10 months. That was me. And then I hired my deputy, Steve Quisenberry, Howard County resident. And it was the two of us for about 1.5 years. And I think we somehow managed to do 13 reports between the two of us. I don't really know how, but we did. I, in November, hired 2 additional investigators. But so, here are the differences, right? But we're a brand new office. This year, we're on pace for 200 complaints. So that's a lot. And I'm going to say of those complaints, probably over 85%, we either refer out to another agency, another law enforcement agency. Maybe it's a crime and we're referring it to the FBI. Maybe it's unemployment insurance fraud and we're referring it to someone else. But we have touched that complaint. We've massaged it. We've worked on it. Maybe we've done a preliminary investigation before we converted it to an investigation. I think right now, today, we have 15 open active investigations, one of which has been open for, 2 years, one of which has been open for 1 year. A couple of them are more recent. It just depends. I mean, I can talk publicly about some of the reports that we've done. We did a report about unlawful waivers of development fees. And I personally worked on that report and kind of nothing else for 6 months. You're doing a lot of interviews. We've had cases where you've done 25 interviews, you're transcribing them, you've pulled lots of documents. So I think the shortest report we've ever done still takes somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks. So you still have to interview people, you still have to pull the documents, you're drafting the report. It's really important as an inspector general. Kind of the only thing you have ever is your credibility. Once that's lost, it can never be regained. So I always am conscious of this idea that just because you can doesn't mean you should. So just because I can speak, is there really something that the office is trying to say? And if we are going to say something, if we are going to do a public report, and I think, again, we've only done maybe, 15 or 17. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. it's got to be right. We have to have something, there's got to be a purpose to it, but it has to be accurate. So you'll be surprised at some minute level of detail that you want to make sure you are getting right when you are doing this. And it's different than a law school paper or a college paper where you can, it's a little bit different. And the other challenge has been, frankly, a big transition for me, the lawyer in me. I can write lots of court documents for a judge, and kind of send off the analysis of the case or the analysis of the rule. I'm always mindful of the fact that my audience for these reports is the general public, someone that doesn't necessarily understand the issue. So if we're going to write a report about the waiver of development fees, yes, everyone in real estate development understands that issue, but I have to explain what a development is, how the fees are assessed, why they're assessed, what the schedule is, why that's important, to then have some one sentence conclusion that they were waived for one developer, but not someone else. So that takes a long time. Sorry, I think that was a long answer to your question.
Oh, that's fine. We love information. And Isabel, your office is slightly different than Kelly's because you do report to the city council, do you not?
No.
No, who do you report to? I know you report, is it a committee?
That was what question I was, which I did have an advisory board that was made up of the mayor, the council president, the comptroller, the solicitor, and a council person, of which I have, through the past 5 years, investigated every one of those positions. So it's kind of unusual. So that was what I fought last year. In question I was on the ballot, and the citizens of Baltimore voted 87% to change it to a citizens-based advisory board. And they did that within a year. I mean, when people say government can't change, I don't believe that. I mean, if people see something that doesn't even make sense, they changed it, and they changed it quickly. So that is who like. When I tell you I report to the people, I really do report to the people. I address my reports to the citizens of Baltimore.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that was voted by
yeah.
But it's a real challenge, though. You guys are trying to create an office, which I applaud you for. I think the challenge is that probably everyone in theory would agree with the idea of inspector general. I think the challenge becomes when you have the person in there, right? And in order for them to truly be independent, they have to have a term. They can't be a political appointee. They can't kind of serve as the winds blow. But everyone thinks transparency is a great thing until the light is shown on them. And then they want that person to report to someone or, be in charge of that person. But that's kind of, that's it right there, right? That's the double-edged sword, that you're trying to have someone whose judgment you trust. If you were the complainant or if you were the subject, it should be the same kind of process, regardless of the results. But I mean, it is best practices to not have an advisory board, not to have an oversight board. I was very grateful and thankful that was a recommendation of the Blue Ribbon Commission. I do understand, though, this tension, that I have continually been critiqued about. Well, who do you report to? Well, who do you report to? Well, I'm just another employee. If I do something inappropriate, if there's pornography on my computer, you can fire me like you can fire anybody else. But if I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, you're kind of stuck with me, throughout the remainder of my term. I don't know, Isabel, if you want to kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, 85% of all inspector generals do not have an oversight or advisory board. And my board is not an oversight board, it's an advisory board. Their biggest responsibility, and I think what makes why I am actually okay with my advisory board, is Their job is to pick the next inspector general. I don't have a politician picking the next inspector general for Baltimore City. As a result of this board, we have citizens that will be picking the next inspector general. And that is actually a very strong thing for Baltimore City, I think. I think they'll do a yearly evaluation of me, but it's not an evaluation of the cases per se. It's an evaluation of whether I'm getting outreach and doing that type of stuff. So, and they meet 4 times a year. So I do think it is very different, like in Miami-Dade, huge inspector general's office. He doesn't have any advice, nothing. And that was also voted by the citizens to make sure that that didn't happen. When we had the Blue Ribbon Commission, that was one of their first and most important findings. There will be no oversight board for Kelly and Madigan. And that is keeping with best practices.
I'll tell you guys kind of a funny story. I went and I got certified as an inspector general a year ago. And I, go to this training and it's all these other inspector generals and it's, new inspector generals and deputies. And I was the youngest person there by probably 15 or 20 years. And I say that because part of this piece of independence is if you feel so strongly about doing the right thing, everyone there already had a pension. They could get up and leave and say, nope, I'm going to do this. And if, nobody, agrees with me, well, then, go with God. And I thought they're like, oh, I need this health insurance. I got 3 little kids. It's a very, very hard, it's a hard job. Sometimes it's popular, but most of the time it's not no one wants to sit and have lunch with you, but they do want you to do the right thing. They do expect you to do the right thing, even if it's difficult. There was a question I'm going to answer in the chat. I'll repeat it for you, Isabel, that says, how much of your mandate is dictated by the ethics rules in your jurisdictions? Howard County, for example, doesn't have the strongest ethics rules relative to neighboring jurisdictions. So similar to Isabel, I also currently right now also have all the duties and responsibilities as the executive director of the Ethics Commission. So to me, the ethics rules are no different. If I'm going to say someone broke or violated a Baltimore County policy or a Baltimore County rule, I would also say that they potentially violated an ethics rule. Maybe they hired someone inappropriately, or maybe they didn't disclose something. But that's probably as far as I can go, because I'm not the county attorney and I'm not the ethics commission. So I can, say upon a reading, it appears that this was violated and make a referral to the ethics commission. Just like we did a report about a council member that moved out of their jurisdiction. And I said, it appears to be a technical violation, but I'm not the county attorney, right? The county attorney is the one tasked with saying, these rules were broken, they weren't broken, which is kind of another good point. You're gonna sense me kind of saying this theme a lot. It's like big and small, broad and narrow, that you can say all of these things. Isabel and I can write these reports. We can say Baltimore County is hemorrhaging millions of dollars by having this vendor or by not fixing their water system. But we can't fix it. We can't make them change course. We can't, I can say, listen, we looked into this. This is a big problem. We have these 5 recommendations. It's one thing I'm going to do this year in my annual report is I'm going to follow up on all the recommendations that the office made and see what the status of them is. Well, I can tell you right now, half of them have not been implemented, but all I can do is point that fact out. I can't say, listen, people are using their email inappropriately. You need to have training courses on email. I mean, I can say it 2 times, 3 times, and then, you can't really say anything else.
Isabel, let me ask you about, is the city solicitor responsible for giving your office advice? How do you handle that? I know Kelly's office has issues with that using the county attorney's office.
I've actually gone through 5 different city solicitors. That's the one thing about Baltimore. We've had a lot of changes, Now, usually I happen to be an attorney. My deputy happens to be attorney. My head of ethics, my other head director, he's also an attorney. So we usually don't have to go to, we will reach out to them for their guidance, but it's not like we have to follow what we try to work together as much as possible. And, our current solicitor is very bright, and, we will talk about things, but I don't have to, go with what they suggest.
Okay. And Kelly, I know you were trying to change that dynamic in Baltimore County.
Yeah, so what happened in Baltimore County was essentially there was a disagreement amongst myself and the administration as to what the statute said and what the statute didn't say. And the challenge for me, the county attorney represents every Baltimore County employee. However, if there is a conflict, I say it says the sky is blue, and they say no, it says the sky is green. The county attorney reports directly to the county executive. And so in this disagreement, he's the county attorney. I'm just little Miss Kelly Madigan. I'm nobody. So I said, this isn't fair. I need to have my own counsel. We have a disagreement, and I can't both be a client and an advocate. I can't both be the inspector general and also be the lawyer representing the office. So that was another point that I brought up recently to the Blue Ribbon Commission, and they agreed with me. Now there's a disagreement currently as to what their recommendation, says. I think their recommendation says if and only if there is a conflict, would I have money for outside counsel? Because, there are a variety of issues where I agree with the advice of the county attorney's office and the office of law, because they're giving me advice in a vacuum. It's not in conflict with another agency, but it would be no different than if I was to ask the Office of Human Resources for personnel files, and they said, no, our assistant county attorney says we don't have to give that to you. And I would say, okay, well, this is what the statute says, right? That's a conflict between two agencies that Office of Law represents. So I think it's important, no different than other agencies. If HR and the police department are having a dispute over something, the Office of Law represents one of them and gets outside counsel for the other because they have a conflict. So that was something that I brought to the Blue Ribbon Commission's attention, and they agreed with me. You have a really good question in the chat.
Yeah, it is about the press.
Mhm.
And it said, how important would you both say a truly independent and watchdog press is to preserving the integrity of your offices? Do you both think either of your offices could have survived the attempts to disarm them without your respective councils in 2021, with an overly restrictive oversight board, without the work of the Baltimore Brew and other outlets sounding the alarm? I think the Baltimore Brew is amazing. That is a two-person run. I honestly, Mark Reuter and Fern Chen, and they made a difference. They made a tremendous difference. They made a tremendous difference in my life, and they made a tremendous difference in Kelly's life too. Also, the other newspaper, the newspapers, the Sun, the Banner, all the news, C4, WBI, they all, Fox News, they all actually really help, because public awareness is so important. And by them actually giving our offices the platform that was needed to make people realize what was really happening, I can't thank them enough. I think it's a partnership. unless we do anything wrong, and I would expect them to do their jobs. I mean, but they I think they made a real big difference. Kelly?
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's the Baltimore Brew, it's their coverage, it's understanding the issues. The Baltimore Brew turned it from the council giving a direct, department head a hard time about misspending $55 on a double-sided business card. They explained the dynamic of they're giving the watchdog person who was just hired and confirmed by this council a hard time about this, what's going on in the background. It's the watchdog press. It's also other inspector generals. I also can't say enough about the Association of Inspectors General that Ms. Cumming and I are both members of. They wrote a letter on my behalf when they tried to pass the bill. I mean, it was picked up by the Brew. The challenge with these offices is it's almost like elementary school math. You sometimes don't get to show your work, how 2 + 2 = 4. What you get the opportunity to do, though, is to highlight some of your work. There's so many times we get a complaint, we look into it, and we close the complaint because nothing inappropriate happened, or someone wanted to, try to weaponize the office and file a complaint in bad faith. That is still the process working, but that doesn't get any coverage. It's kind of these splashy reports, which at least for our office is a very small percentage of the overall work. But in doing those reports, you also get an opportunity to talk about the office, what the office does, what the office doesn't do that outreach. This is how you can reach out to us. We're just regular people that happen to come to work every day, work really hard, focused on our mission, but we don't get to be kind of out in public. We're not doing campaigns. We're not, and the work of an inspector general kind of goes under the radar, again, because it's not necessarily popular, so to speak, but the results highlight ways to improve government. That's the only tool we got, that's the tool of compliance, which sometimes isn't pretty, but if you really believe in making something better, it's like that, you got to take the critique with the compliments, and that's kind of what we have.
So when you submit a report, how do you publish it? And how detailed is your report?
This is a good question. I'll go first because we're
different.
A different process. So because I originally had one person, then 2 people, we write one report. We write the report knowing that it is going to be a public report. So we don't use names. It's very rare that we use names. We write it with the intention of it being public. Those reports go directly to the administration or whoever the decision holder is. If it's a county council person, it would go to the chair of county council. The majority of our reports go to the county executive with a CC to the Office of Law, Human Resources. But that's half of the job, writing the report and giving it to the decision maker. We don't publish that report unless and until we get a response back from the administration. Now, in theory, the administration could decide not to respond to the report, but that is the check on the balance, right? It's not just what I say, hey, you guys made all these fee waivers. They get a chance to respond to the report, and then both reports are published. Occasionally, we do a reply to their response, very occasionally, if they've pointed out something that we've got wrong. And that, I embrace that. Sometimes the responses are not, I don't know, they can have a different tone to them, if you will, but that's part of the process. Again, it's not just what the office says, what the office found, what the investigation. That's their opportunity to say, well, hey, Miss Madigan, you got this wrong, or you didn't interview this person, or you said this, but it's really that. And I'm really, really, really proud of the fact that there have been very, very few things that have been pointed out in a response. But that's also why you focus so much on the beginning of interviewing everyone and pulling documents and making sure if you're going to speak, you have to be accurate with what you're saying. And then once you get that response back, I normally give 2 weeks for a response date with an extension of an additional 2 weeks if I have to produce a reply, and then I'll simultaneously publish them. We then kind of, to go back to the earlier point, it's kind of this idea like without the press, where would the office be? If a tree falls in the woods, does anybody hear it? You know, we do all this work for these reports. Sometimes we issue a press release. Sometimes they get picked up. Sometimes they don't get picked up. We've written a couple of, I think, really good reports that haven't been media, you know, there hasn't been an appetite for them, but the report's still there. But we're reliant on the media to help spread the word about the report, because every time you issue a report, and Isabel will tell me if this is different for her, more people know about the office, which generates more phone calls, which potentially generates more leads, which potentially generates more reports, all of which is done with a goal towards making Baltimore County better.
Yep. That's 100% true. To give you an idea, when I first started, we had 70 hotline complaints. This year, we're going to have over 1,000. I've been here longer than Kelly, but that shows you how much of a difference it does make, and how much publicity and knowing. In our, because I have a bigger staff, I'm able to do 2 reports. I have a very detailed report that some of my reports have been over 50 pages. Those go to the action holder. So the action holder, which usually the mayor or the area, unless it's an elected official, the action holder for elected officials is the public. So in those cases, it would be released to the public. But in most cases, it's just the report is sent to the action holder. I give them 2 weeks to get a response. If I don't have a response, I don't care. I publish it anyway. I mean, that's part of our job. We usually do a public synopsis, because our initial reports that go to the action holder include all the names, details, that. And with privacy laws, we can't release a lot of the things that come in that. So what we do is we issue a public synopsis. And when we issue the public synopsis, that goes to the public, and it goes right on our website. It gets sent to all the media. It gets sent to the city council. It gets sent to, everybody. We have subscribers to the office, and everybody gets it at the exact same time. So that's the way we try to get people to know what we're doing. We have a report coming out tomorrow. That'll be interesting.
Nice. There was an earlier question that might fit here. How much pushback do you get from the people you're investigating or the offices you're investigating? And then what do you do when you do get that pushback?
Pushback's part of the job. I think in the end, if something ever happens to me, I just want people to remember I did my job. It's part of what we do. Unfortunately, our job is to let people know many times what is wrong. And of course, for electeds, that's not good stuff. So, but we do our job, and we move on to the next case. That's the thing. I mean, we just have so many cases. I have 48 open cases right now. We don't dwell. We just move on to the next case, and not everybody's always happy, but that's just part of the job we have. Kelly, do you want to add anything?
I feel like I've been there for 3 years, and all I've faced is pushbacks. I mean, I was there for, I don't know, a year, and the chief of staff put I can speak about it because it was in the media. Somebody did a PIA request, put a policy over me effective immediately. I had to have a reason for asking for the records. That's not what the statute says. Then I had a 2.5-hour budget hearing that was supposed to be about hiring a secretary, that was about calling me a racist and accusing me of being a hammer and everything I see is a nail and having buyer's remorse. Then I had a bill that was tried to be passed to completely claw back the powers of the office. Then I had a blue ribbon commission for 10 months. I've learned that it's not personal. It feels very personal. It might feel more personal to me because I'm the first. And this administration hired me. They selected me to the job. They passed the bill prior to my even starting. It's their language, you know, I'm just the one trying to enforce it. I found, though, that first week at that Inspector General's conference, listening to other Inspector Generals talk, I think I rose my hand and said, this is basically better than therapy, because this is inherent with the job. This is the tension with the job. This is the challenge, the unpopularity of being the hall monitor, of being the person that's pointing out when someone hasn't done something appropriate, right? We don't get to say, oh gosh, the Department of Aging's really rocking out of the park. You know, they've had an amazing, they've finished under budget no, that's not, we look for fraud, waste, misconduct, accountability, efficiency, and integrity. So when we come shining our flashlights, people aren't happy to see us because they immediately think they've done something wrong, and no matter how nice you are, no matter how fair you are, there's that tension of like, oh gosh, why does the hall monitor stopping me? Why? Here's my slip. I get to go to the bathroom, you know, I did Times New Roman 12 point, but whatever it is, you know, there is this tension. The best thing you can do, though, is, this sounds like a little hokey, but you have to have faith in the process. You have to have faith in the person that you hired, and you have to have faith in the process. It is a little bit like being out on a branch, because you can't make us drop an investigation. You can't make us come up with the result that you want. We have to treat them all the same. We have to follow the evidence, and whatever result it leads to, that's the result. But if you genuinely want to make it better, this process, and it's not me and it's not Isabel, it's all these inspector generals. You know, every federal agency has one. They have the Inspector General Act that each president, you know, doubles down on and try to make it so you can't fire people and protect their budget and protect their resources and protect their funding. You have to believe in the process. There was an earlier question in the chat about how do you protect your budget? I mean, you can't. You can't. Every fiscal year, I have in Baltimore County, which is, and again, I'm not different than any other agency. All the other agencies go through the same process. The only difference is my job is to look over the shoulders of the person potentially giving me the funding that no other agency has. But I have to make a request for a budget, and it has to be, I'm at two political whims. Potentially, county executive has to consider my budget request along with every other agency's. You know, one time I asked for 3 positions. That was a lot for me. I want to grow, but I want to grow responsibly. This past fiscal year, I asked for 1 position, and then I have to go defend my budget to the county council. I think the best practice is to have language that says your budget can't be reduced absent a written justification. But, you know, a friend of ours, former president of the Association of Inspectors General, he was the Inspector General in Louisiana.
Still is
For several years, and twice has had the Senate get upset with him and given him a budget of $0. Zero. Which he then got the media involved, and it all worked out, but twice.
Yep.
He has looked down a piece of paper that says there's no budget next fiscal year for the Inspector General.
Yeah.
That's pretty outrageous. Kind of mystifying. So let's see, are there any other questions that we should
is the councilwoman still on? I heard there was a councilwoman.
Yeah, Liz, are you still on? Yes, she's still on.
I think actually having an inspector general's office is very positive for every jurisdiction. The person that actually brought forth the bill that changed and made my advisory board belong to the people was actually a council person. So, I mean, I think everybody usually talks about, you know, integrity and accountability, and this is a real opportunity to get an office that can actually do that. And we are different than like the auditors and stuff. We go in, we go out, we do the investigations. And I think this would be a very positive thing for Howard County. And actually, just so people know, in Florida, every single county has an inspector general by law. So other jurisdictions really have a lot more accountability. And like Kelly mentioned, in the federal government, each agency, that's why there's 93 different inspector generals in DC. So all the different federal agencies have their own inspector general. So
I want to make one comment, and you know, this is almost like, how do you bake a recipe to make an inspector general, right? You put there's all these different elements to it, but at least in Baltimore County, while my office was created in the code, we are not in the charter. I advocated to the Blue Ribbon Commission that I thought it would be beneficial to the office to be in the charter for a variety of reasons. The simplest of which is it's harder to get rid of something in the charter. A code can be amended, can be redacted. You know, that's what happens each and every time there is a legislative session. You know, you're tweaking laws, you're changing things, you're making things retroactive. The charter is different, right? The other thing that I have realized, and I don't think it's through anyone's fault, it's just in this idea of how do you make an inspector general? What ingredients are you putting in to kind of make it perfect? It's never going to be perfect, but one thing that the charters give certain department heads the ability to ask for a legal opinion. And I have asked the county attorney for a legal opinion and been told, well, you can't have one. You're not a department head in the charter. The idea of having the office in the charter makes it more difficult to get rid of. And you're not worrying about that now. You're worrying about that for the Steve Street situation, you know, where one day he wakes up and his budget is zero. You're kind of like one politically sensitive investigation away from the whole thing kind of being on the chopping block. But if it's in the charter and you can tie the budget to it, I advocated to the Blue Ribbon Commission that I thought the office should have a fixed percent of the overall budget, you know, whether it's 0.01%, whatever then it's fixed. They didn't want to do that because they wanted to give the office, especially a young office like mine that's still growing and kind of growing a little bit exponentially in the beginning before it kind of steadies off, the ability to potentially ask for more than that. But I would say once you kind of have the office up and running and you've kind of test driven that vehicle, it probably makes sense to have a fixed percentage, you know, of the overall budget, because you know the overall budget is going to grow, assigned to the inspector general's office. And if for some reason you're going to allocate them less than that percent budget, you would have to have a written justification and or potentially, you know, a council hearing as to why. I think that's kind of this other piece to it. I have only had one time to go defend my budget before county council, but it was done in a public forum. And that's another kind of piece. Again, we can't always show the math of 2 + 2 is 4, but to the extent we have an opportunity to talk about the needs, what we're doing, what we're not doing in these annual reports and in these kind of public debates, I think that's helpful, because that also allows us to be accountable for what we're doing. Again, we can't say, open up the file drawer and look at all of this stuff, but we can say things like, well, we've done 10 accountability investigations, and they took up, 10% of our overall time, and it took this long, and we subpoenaed X number of so you can kind of describe how in depth you're being in that process, which is why you then are turning around and justifying, I need additional investigators. Our numbers have gone up. This is where they are. I have this hokey thing, but I liked it. I never believed in this idea of a kind of a big Ed McMahon check of how much money I had saved, because different people will calculate things differently. So I took the overall budget of the office and I divided it by the population of Baltimore County. And I said it costs each county residents 43 cents to run the office, which was, roughly the same as a postage stamp. And in exchange for that 43-cent investment, this is what you got. You got reports on this, you got reports on that.
Right. And in Baltimore City, it costs the same as a snowball, $4.50. I stole Kelly's idea. Brilliant.
Yeah, that was smart. Do we have any questions for Isabel or for Kelly? Joel, I'm not sure what your question was. It's possible Kelly answered part of it.
She's answered pieces of it at different times. Yes.
Okay, good.
Because I guess part of our county recently had a dispute over investigations by the auditor, because there are multiple provisions that I don't see in the Baltimore County Charter.
Well, I think the
other
challenge,
investigations either by the council or by the auditor. So you're lacking that. And I didn't know, copying yours may not be the best because we have a different charter provision for that. So
Article
do you
10
have
is
any
fine.
conflict with the auditor on?
well, so
running
that's, yeah, no, that's a great question. I try to work closely with the auditor. I'm not an auditor. There are certain complaints that we get that are more appropriate for an audit to happen. Was this overall performance failure? Is there no check to the balance in terms of the process? I do investigations. So for the most part, if it's one person doing something inappropriate, that's going to be an IG case. If it's a business process that's failing, why were these 74 checks sent out and, they weren't didn't get tax taken out of them or something like that. Maybe that's something I would look into, but that is kind of like an overall performance of that function. So again, I'm not an auditor. I don't have any auditors on staff, but I work closely where appropriate with the auditors. I've made recommendations in our reports that some programs be audited. I've said, we did a report about the employee background system, and we found a lot of background checks. We found a lot of discrepancies, and one of our recommendations was an overall audit. They have 20 plus employees. They have more power. They think differently. And the other thing that's really important to remember is an auditor's office interacts differently with the solely investigative IG office. So auditors, they're going to say, hi, Joel, we're here to do our yearly audit of the traffic stop. And here are our questions. And we're going to meet with you and we're going to talk about it. It's much more collaborative, where an investigating IG, which is what I am and what Isabel is, we are doing confidential investigations. We're not going to say, hey, Joel, we got a complaint about you. We're looking into you. We're going to interview a bunch of your employees. We're doing that not to harm your reputation, because what if we look into this and this is a whole bunch of nothing? We don't want people to know that we got a complaint about you. It's not fair to you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if we got to the point where we said, hey, we think Joel might do something, maybe something happened here, we would give you the opportunity to sit down and talk with you, but it's kind of done behind closed doors, where that's not how an auditor's office works. They have much more interaction with the administration or the mayor, or whatever the kind of executive office is. I think I got a little bit off topic, Joel, but I think the point was that I don't need to have the audit function. That was your question? I think I got off topic. Sorry.
Also, don't forget, you have different standards. You have the
Right.
yellow book, which is what's used
Right.
for auditors. Okay, so an audit does what Kelly was talking about, an engagement letter. They let people know how long the presentation will be. They do all of, we don't do that. We follow the green book. So we're more in and out, let people know what happened and on to the next one. So it's very, very different. In Baltimore City, we have the comptroller's office. The comptroller has 45 auditors on their team. When they wrote this, my law way back 2005 with Martin O'Malley, they actually, because the comptroller at the time wanted to make sure the inspector general would never compete. So the word audit is not in anywhere in my my charter. I am in the charter article, Article 10. So we made sure that there's two separate organizations, and we do work together every once in a while, but pretty much we're doing the investigations, and it is different.
I think the other thing I would say though, Joel, is it's hard for me. I guess I'm trying to share with you kind of my thoughts because I've been in the car driving it, but I've never been on the other side. You know, I was hired into this position. I didn't have to kind of have the debate of it was already established when I came in. I've been the one driving it saying, this really works. You got to fix this, you know. Sorry, I think I cut you off. I didn't mean to.
Kelly, the problem I see since you began with your law background, I have a law degree too.
Okay. I'm not a lawyer anymore though. I just play one on TV.
You are.
And now you don't like numbers, but your code says that the background of the auditor or the inspector general rather, should have background in auditing, law, ethics, compliance, government operations, and financial management. So you as the first one are doing it through a law, but your successors may not have a law degree, so they'll be doing it through the auditing thing, and then you're going to have a conflict because with the auditor going, why we got two auditor people here.
Maybe, but the word audit doesn't appear anywhere in my statute. It says that the inspector general shall be a member of the bar that shall have this background. And I had 4 years of financial crimes investigations, campaign finance at the Office of the State Prosecutor. But the word audit doesn't appear in the statute.
Right.
Well, when I'm looking, I see auditing.
That's just in what an inspector general should possibly be. There's a whole bunch of different criteria.
It's not under the responsibilities of the job though.
Yeah.
No, it's under the qualifications of the person. so-
Qualification, right? But it doesn't
Yeah.
say you have to have all those things because almost nobody has all of those.
Right.
things.
I think
You
it's
could have- yeah.
Right,
But
so
but your point is well taken.
Former auditor person who came over from an auditing background.
Mhm.
You're gonna have basically two auditors in Baltimore County.
Well, you could have two auditors, but if an auditor came into my current position, they would not be able to conduct audits because the only thing under the powers of the office says criminal, administrative, or civil investigations. So they could have an auditor background, and maybe the office will grow so much that they'll have 17 investigators and they won't themselves need to be an investigator. They can have that auditing background. I mean, I would assume it's similar in how you are approaching a case, but they won't be able to do audits. So I think the county auditor is going to have job security.
All right, and you talked about the conflict with the county executive, which I keep saying if we don't put it in the charter, the county executive is just going to control it. And as Liz asked at our meeting the other day, who does the Office of Law work for? And again, I urge the council, if you have 3 votes, to follow the charter and hire your own attorney. So I was just trying to point out some of these things. So if we're going to go down this route, we don't cause all these potholes.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, and I hope it will be useful. The Blue Ribbon Commission did a real deep dive. I mean, there's a couple of the Atlanta office, when Isabel was part of that, when they created an IG down there, put together a pretty comprehensive report about what you need, what you don't need. The Blue Ribbon Commission in Baltimore County, I think they had 10 public meetings. They took testimony from a lot of people. They hired the UB Schaefer Center. There you go, Claudia and Jake, for $100,000 to do research, kind of looking at all of this. So there are a lot of the same broad brushstrokes of it needs to be independent. It needs to be in the charter. What does independence mean? One of those functions is a budget. One of those functions is not an advisory or oversight board. You have to have direct access to records. So there are kind of those themes, but I think it'll, they can be popular and very unpopular all at the same time.
I think Curie had a question that he posted regarding the limits of the subpoena power that both of your offices have, and what happens when somebody wants to ignore that.
Sure. You want to go first, Isabel?
We would take them to court. Yeah, I mean, we haven't had that happen so far. Well, actually, no, I take that back. We did recently have that happen, but we took them to court and we won.
So my statute is very poorly written for the subpoena. The way it's currently written, and the Blue Ribbon Commission actually just recently recommended that be changed, is I can make a request and then I have to wait 90 days before issuing a subpoena, which, after talking with them for an outside vendor, I mean, and this is kind of the rationale behind it. So each and every Baltimore County employee has a duty to cooperate. And it would never be my intention to start to subpoena records from a Baltimore County agency or a Baltimore County employee. I mean, the statute says you can just go take those. The challenge becomes when you're investigating an outside vendor or you're investigating monies and you don't have the ability to have a hard ask in the beginning. And that's, as a former prosecutor, it's a strategic decision when to ask and when to show a subpoena. But if you don't have that and somebody knows you're investigating them, well, there's a potential for, disappearing evidence and not being responsive. And so the Blue Ribbon Commission agreed that made no sense. And they're going to change that to have no waiting period. Which is important. But the other thing that was initially supposed to be passed in Baltimore County and then wasn't, but the Blue Ribbon Commission has recommended, and I think this is maybe as important as a charter amendment. I mean, I don't know, Isabel, you'll tell me if you disagree, is it's important to have buy-in. So I asked to have something added to the code of conduct that there was a duty to cooperate. But you need support from the stakeholders, from the administration and from county council. If you're going to have this inspector general, you want people to go to them. You want that process to work. And it makes no sense to go through all of the challenges and setting one up and getting it passed to have it be toothless and have no power. You want people to cooperate. You want them to be fair and nice and pleasant and professional. But if they want to interview someone, hopefully you have done your due diligence in hiring the right person that's not doing that willy-nilly. That person needs to be interviewed. And if they choose to decline to be interviewed, well then, there's availability of employee discipline, and that should be spelled out whether they're a merit or non-merit employee. But nothing would be worse than going through this exercise and not having all of the relevant support from all of the stakeholders to try to make it successful, because that would be a shame. that kind of answered your question, I think.
Yes, I think it did. I think you both answered that. Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Kelly or Isabel?
I haven't eaten yet today.
Oh,
I came right from, we had the advisory board meeting today, so I'm like, dear, tired.
well, thank you both very much for coming onto our Zoom meeting and being a part of our panel discussion. We learned a lot. Thank you for giving us great tips. And
Happy to help in the future too. Happy to help. I think it's a
Yeah,
very important thing.
That's
Yeah,
why-
thank you so much for having us. I think it's so humbling to be invited. It's nice to get to talk about the great work of both of our offices and kind of tell you the pros and the cons. I mean, listen, I've been a public servant. I believe in this stuff. I believe in doing something for the greater good. I would be hard pressed to think if you were able to create an office that office wouldn't have value. You know, maybe not immediately, but within 6 months, a year, they're going to start to produce reports that are going to be beneficial to making Howard County government better. And sometimes that has a number associated with it, right? And sometimes it doesn't. You know, I think the report where a developer got preferential treatment to build a tennis court in their backyard, there was no dollar associated with that report, but that report is just as important as a report that identifies $1 million in waste. You know, it's just, it's shining sunlight to make government better.
Definitely. That's great. Well, thank you. Isabel, go have
Thank you.
dinner.
I am. Thank you all so much.
Yes, and happy to help going forward. If you need anything, you have my contact information. Don't feel free to reach out.
And I'm on the national board of the Association of, yeah, I'm actually an officer of the Association of Inspector Generals. So,
Oh, that's great to know. Thank you both.
thank
Thank you. Go UBBs, right? Go
Yeah.
UBBs.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.